Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Marketing Water Cooler podcast. My name is Jeremy Francesi. Thanks for hanging out with us as always. Steph, what are we getting into on this one?
Let's talk about the transition from live events to digital events.
I like this topic. So live events are coming back, right? And obviously there's still some hesitation. There's definitely a good amount. I think I saw 30% of people have 33% of the market. This is such an ambiguous way to start. 33% of the study I'm referencing that I'm not labeling properly, said they have events on their calendar that they're looking forward to. I think people are starting to get excited about it. And look, trade shows are a big industry when it comes to just how much money is put into it. I think last estimates, it was closer to $40 billion industry. Massive industry. That being said, what I want to talk about today on this episode is what the last 18 months of COVID has done to the event space, but not in the way I think people listening and tuning in are thinking we're going to go down this rabbit hole. When we think about trade shows and conferences and those live events, one, I think they're awesome. I'm a big believer in how awesome they are. However, thinking something's awesome and thinking that they make money are very different things. Trade shows are expensive. Trade shows are very expensive. So couple of things. Inkwell, they're an agency. They did a study. I'm referencing a couple things. We'll kind of walk through to set the frame here. Because if you don't do events, you're early in the game. That's okay. Let me give you some figures to estimate, because you're not going to show up with $500 and get something out of it. They're expensive to go to. Average trade shows cost companies $100 to $150 per square foot of floor space that they're renting. If it's a 10 by 10 booth, it could cost $14,000. And then they look at budgeting as high as $50,000 on that end. When you look at it, what you're really assessing for is, and I'm kind of reiterating on this piece, they identify, it's going to be a $50,000, $60,000 in, right? You can get in for less, but when it comes to travel, infrastructure, your booth, your setup, your people, lodging, all of the things that come from the event, they're not cheap. And so if you're doing half a dozen a year at $60K a pop, then all of a sudden you're doing you're spending $250,000, $300,000, $500,000, $1 million a year to show up physically at events, to make an impression, to make a connection, to make a relationship and create business value. Okay. Use that to set the framework. So my question is this, is like, how are we measuring success from that? Because when I talk to a tremendous amount of people, they show up, they meet people, they exchange cars, and maybe one thing happens from the event, right? So they're spending $500,000 a year to go to these events to get visible, ton of infrastructure in place to maybe leave with a deal opportunity, like maybe 3 opportunities. So my belief is this: they're incredibly expensive. They require a tremendous amount of work, and they take a tremendous amount of effort and resources from the company to being mobile, up to standards, prepared to network, and able to nurture in between those events, right? And the reality is, what happened the last 18 months is experienced, tenured members of industry were forced to learn one skill that nobody's talking about that really matters, which is accessing peer groups. Those people had to access peers online for the first time in a very real way. I'm not saying they didn't call people. I'm not saying they didn't email people. I'm not saying they didn't have communities, but I'm saying the disproportionate number of those senior level executives in these organizations were forced for the first time to steer away from in-person events, networking, the lunches, the coffees, the real building that took place 20 years ago when you were working in the industry. And now they went to Slack channels and Discord communities and Facebook, LinkedIn groups, and they went online to access peers. So what we're going to kind of dig into in this episode is understanding, is it worth spending $1 million a year to go to an event, to put up a booth, when LinkedIn is now Facebook 2010? People are talking politics, sports, passions, interests, profession. And you are now sitting at the doorstep of a 24/7, 365 conference, networking, event, trade show, which is your social platforms and these communities. Whether it's Slack or it's LinkedIn, the same rules apply with zero cost to entry. And so the next stage is how to activate an organization to get involved online, just like they would if they were flown to Las Vegas or San Antonio for a conference. You set up your digital booth, you go wiggle around and move around the event to meet as many people as possible, and you leave with contacts. The difference is now the event never ends. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. And this isn't going to be the last time we talk about it. Steph, why don't you open it up? What's the first question we can kind of dig into to like narrow in on the conversation?
I excuse me. A thing I'm sort of wondering about is if getting away from in-person events will bring out a different group of people, if, because, I know personally, big crowds, don't like them. If someone, it's more likely for someone like me, and I know there are a lot of other people like me, to get out and get involved if it's something a lot less, what's what I'm looking for? Like high pressure, high stakes, in a way than an in-person gathering.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely room for it, right? It's the internet democratized the way you want to communicate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and so let's run through a couple pieces. I want to kind of highlight this, right? So, let's see what we got. A couple things that came through the pre-call prep. For what is this? 46% of trade show attendees are in executive or upper level management. One source says 56% of visitors will travel over 400 miles. And you go on from there, right? So the punchline is these events bring the right caliber people to one central place, which for some and most may be a long distance. And that's what makes the event so valuable. My question is, what's easier, going to Vegas from China or logging into LinkedIn?
I don't even think that's a real question.
Right. But this is where, and we're going to talk in other episodes about like designing a workflow around the real things that matter, not what marketing's supposed to sound like. We have events, and like, I'm not saying events aren't amazing, but I'm saying if you have to look at events just like everything else. We have a client right now that spends $10,000 a year in print media. Okay. Not a lot of money, not a large ad budget. We're taking that money, putting it into digital.
Mm-hmm.
The same conversation about return on investment. So my question to you as an executive, if you're spending $1 million a year at 10 trade shows to move 15 people around, $100,000 a pop, what's the return on that 1.5? What's the return on that $400,000? Because if you're moving that many people around to be visible, to get 2 leads that a customer values $100,000, it's not working. So if you took that $500,000, let's say you took $200,000 of it and you focused on putting out a podcast that was so intimately aligned with your target buyer that they came to you because they found it informational, educational, aspirational. They found it to be a source that, better than the trade shows and the conferences, they get to learn, get engaged in the things that matter most, and maybe hear from other industry peers because you interview them on the show. And now the exact reason they go to trade shows to be a part of the industry, to learn, meet new people, maybe they do that around your community. And it costs them $0, but some time out of their day, which is what it's going to cost them anyway, because they're already on these platforms. I think there's a big shift that's going to take place. I think people are going to start to look in the next, it's not going to happen this year. I guarantee you they're not going to, because they're just going to look at the event and say, roll with it, because they want to get back. The majority of people that are thinking through critically, think about your marketing decisions and what happened when COVID happened the first time. No events, no coffees, no dinners, no client meet. You had to go 100% online. So I want you to sit with that fear and discomfort and understand that if it happened once, it can happen again. So why go back to the trade shows for $1 million a year? Why not do 300? Why not do 500,000? Put the other 500 to other digital native experiences. Do your own live events, right? Do something that you can do online, because the second it got cut off, puts you in a pretty tough spot. What else you got, Steph?
Yeah, I'm also sort of thinking about how much downtime that said employees going to these trade shows probably have. You're not, the whole time you're there, if you're standing at a booth, how much of that are you really interacting, when like you could be using that time in a more valuable place, interacting with people online, and doing research and looking for people to connect with and starting conversations and whatnot. It's sort of, to me, it seems like a more productive and better serving of the time and like effort and money that these people are putting in.
Yeah, 100%. Or use your online to prep the session. If I'm going to a conference, I should have 10 meetings booked already.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I should be meeting people there. That's step one. I should be targeting specific accounts while I'm there. And then I should have other opportunities, partners. Like you have a plan when you go to these events. My point is, why not use all of the work outside of the events to at least make them more engaging? Right? Right? Why not? If you know in the next year you're gonna, it's not about transacting and being it's about just thinking through. Events are a part of a larger strategy. It's a channel. It's an opportunity to be visible, be valuable, be engaging, and be worth working with, right? Even if it's a conversation at a time. But it's astounding to me that there's so much money going to these events, just like softwares, and they're not looking at like, what are we getting?
Mhm.
Sure, we walked away with what? Business cards, contacts, a couple demos. Like, did you walk away with qualified pipeline? You spent $500,000, got no content from it because they're not producing anything while they're there, probably, right? You went there, you made no content, so you didn't get that value out of it for a cultural thing for employee development and the staff culture of like, wow, we're out and doing things and we're visible. Like that can get people excited. You didn't do that, so that's not on the table. So internal marketing didn't hit. Talent HR, right? Maybe you walked away with some leads or some opportunities, but out of those dozen that you get, you close 25%. Those 3 deals convert. $100,000 average value. Okay, $300,000 from that event, if that's what happens, right? Which is good, but not if you're spending $1 million a year on 6 events,
Right.
right? Because that's like, it's just the math of it, right? We got to think through the elements of, is it actually creating positive return, or how can we make it more valuable? And I think this is where the shift takes place is, and we'll close it out in a couple minutes because I want to be able to open this up at other conversations, but this is what happens when you go to events. You meet people, you shake hands, and you make connections both directly as well as indirectly. What I mean by indirectly is maybe you're making connections for other people, right?
Mhm.
I'm at a B2B marketing conference. I'm walking and doing something. I see somebody I recognize and I look at them. Hey, John, come over here. I want to introduce you to Sally, Alex, and Sophia. We've been talking. They do things at an agency. They're at a tech company. They all handle this, and this. I just think you would fit into this conversation, or you'd have something to add, right? That is not only common, it's expected as you start to cross-pollinate networks. My question is, why not do that on LinkedIn? That happened and stuff we talked about. This literally happened to me like yesterday. Or no, today's Monday. It was Friday. I got tagged and commented in something. Literally, it was a chain of hundreds of comments, and the friend was like, "Hey, Jeremy, tagging you in this. I'd like to see. I'd like your thoughts on this." I put my thoughts in there, and then 10 different exchanges went on from there of the random people that were getting involved. And you're saying, why does that matter? It's the same thing. Pat said, "Hey, Jeremy, you should join this conversation and add your 2 cents." Then I got 2 connection requests out of it, couple engagement pieces. People checked out my like it's just like your page is your booth. And if you're not in the conversations, then you're not on the floor. They're the same thing. And you as your colleagues at your company can look out for each other. And if you're a techie and you have somebody that's in HR and you run across an HR post and it's talking about things, and you should tag Alex, say, "Alex, this is an interesting post. Thought you'd like it. What are your thoughts?" Vice versa. They're like, "Hey, this is on cybersecurity, not my area, but John, maybe this is something you can add you to." Then you start to look at each other as a way to, let's help our people get involved. If you have a culture, that's why we say marketing is a culture. If you have a culture for that, you don't need to go to trade shows and events and spend millions of dollars, because you're in the live event, which is the world and the internet, which never closes. LinkedIn does not have an off hour, right? And so that's the big thing I want people to get across in this episode is like, you're going to spend the money, but if you're not capturing content, you're not doing certain things while you're there, you're not using digital marketing, community engagement, and those resources and to strengthen your attendance and your conversations at those events, then I just don't understand why you're there unless it's proving to be a profitable investment.
Right.
Because otherwise you're just paying to be visible. And there's so many other places to take $1 million and get visible.
Right. Yeah.
So what else did I miss? What do we need to break down?
I think just the internet is, like you said, democratizing conversation and whatnot, but it's also bringing an open, bringing a place for more people who wouldn't have the opportunity to go to those trade shows, who, they can't afford 500K to fly their staff out to wherever, but they might have a really valuable product or, you know, thing to offer the world. And so I think the internet really is bringing it down to bringing up the base level of who can succeed.
I would agree with that. One thing I'd also want to add here is when you look at using social, how do I word this? Like, there's so much more you can do when it comes to getting involved in a way that it has more value than just the corporate branding, right? Like it's like it genuinely is about getting involved in the conversation. When you look at the trade shows and how they function and what you do, like you send 5, 7, 10 people there, they do the whole thing. Well, if you have 100 employees and they're all good at what they do, what's more valuable? 10 people going to a conference or 100 people actually getting involved?
Right.
Right. And so I kind of lost the train of thought I was going down on that, but I really think the punchline is like, it's a culture. It's not like a hack, right? You're going to go to events. Fine. That's great. But like, what happens next? Right. Like you just wait for the next event. You have flyers on your booth. Like, oh, here's where I was going with it. When your customer arrives at that event, they are already in a journey of their own. They may be aware of a problem and not aware of solutions. They may be unaware of the problem and unaware of solutions. They may be so aware of the problem, hired a vendor, that vendor fired them, or excuse me, they fired the vendor, it didn't work. And now they're a year and a half into this problem. And it's so frustrating that it hurts, right? At the organizational level, like you have no idea where they're at. And I just think sometimes you go to events and you're like, I'm just going to market to everybody the same way.
Right.
The value of online is you get to scale out customization. You can put out content for people that are in a certain part of their journey. You can put out different content for people at a different state in their journey. People aware of problems, but not in a position where they care enough to solve it, don't need the same things as people that are really struggling right now and they need a solution. I have 4 burners on my stove. If one of them goes out, I'm not going to call it to get fixed immediately because I got shit going on and it's not stopping me from doing what I'm doing. Right? Like it's understanding where your customer's at. And when you go to that trade show, you have people that can talk and that's amazing. Then you have 5 flyers all there that standardize FAQs, solution overviews, and general stuff, right? High level organizational stuff. Then all of a sudden you miss the ability to talk to an end user specific, the subject matter expert, the decision maker stakeholder, right? One may want case studies on impact to P&L. Another one may want to understand how the interface feels, right? You demo some, you talk to the others, but like, if you do that work ahead of time online, using podcasting on LinkedIn, on YouTube, running ads where it's necessary, doing community-based engagement and getting involved in Slack channels, like, the trade show is you just meeting them because you want to meet people you're doing business with.
Right.
They've been with you the whole time. The problem is they go to these trade shows, spend $1 million on the year of trade shows, and they try to make that moment a big landmark in the customer journey. But it's different for all of them. And that's the challenge. So we'll keep riffing on this. We'll draw some parallel. We'll get into some like very specific things on like what companies can do to like activate talent when it comes to like getting online, taking the trade show event space online and what that means. But you have to quantify the value of events. And I understand that the feeling of being visible. I do. But if you're spending if you're spending $60,000, $100,000, $200,000 to show up at an event with a booth, with people, with all you have to start to think through how that's creating revenue, reputation, culture, revenue. Like there's only so many things that marketing is responsible for. And one of them has to be demand generation with in-market buyers and educating the market to drive and accelerate future demand. So if you're not getting any of those at the trade shows, then all the context you look at and you look at qualified pipeline and the deals that are in process and the emails you got at the trade show aren't in the pipeline, then the trade show didn't work. Right. And so that's what I wanted to talk about today. Steph, anything you wanted to throw in the mix there before we close things up?
I think just summing it up real quick, if you know that you're going to this trade show to meet people you have already spoken to, then I feel like that will tell you ahead of time, is this going to be worth it to go? And the answer is probably yes. You know, if you've already like made connections and started the conversation, just going and meeting someone in person, hopefully that'll be there to seal the deal. And you don't have to work, you know, you've skipped to step 2 versus starting from step 1.
Yeah. Look, there's always the potential for serendipity, you know?
Sure.
People walk by and there's nothing about, we have clients that have like, yeah, we've met them at a trade show. I'm not saying they don't work, but to Steph's point, to the point at large, it's like,
do they
why not use your salespeople to call the top 100 accounts you want to call to and say, like, you know, something along the lines of most decision makers in this audience are struggling with either A or B. Which one's the top priority for you, Mr. and Mrs. CFO? This one, hey, great. We don't expect, you know, take a step back here. This would throw people for a loop. You know, hey, most CFOs are struggling with managing rising labor costs or investing in culture without trimming the bottom line, right? Just like whatever it is, this one or this one. That's the priority. Hey, we have a white paper that we put out specifically about that. Why don't I send this over to you? Are you going to be at the event in Vegas? You are. Let me send this to you. Why don't we set up 15 minutes at that point for X, Y, and Z, whoever's there, they can unpack this in more detail, right? You use the content as a ways to add value and bring people closer. Add value, bring people closer, right? It's about the answer to the question they ask, not the statement to the thing you want to say.
Right.
So if you use it as a way to like, hey, the trade show's coming up, let's use our content. Hey, we actually just put out a podcast about this. Use it to add value. So when you go to the trade show, they're closer. Anyways, we'll dig in deeper at other episodes. But we really need to get more dialed in on like the events are expensive. They cost a lot of money. There's a lot of resources that come into play. And it just begs the question, what if you could own the channel? Create amazing content, audio, video, podcast, written, create amazing content that's worth sharing, that they bring into communities. That Slack channel turns into a trade show. That Facebook group turns into a trade show. They're all trade shows. You set up a digital booth, you handshake, you talk, you interact, you meet, you leave with more familiarity with new people.
Yeah.
It's that simple. So that's all we got for y'all today. Enjoy, take care, and we'll be back with more very soon. Hey, thanks so much for sticking around to the end. If you liked the video, smash the like button and hit subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the new episodes. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. We will fold them into future episodes and make sure that you get the help and the answers you're really looking for all things marketing and communications.